everybody, it's Paul Yeager. This is the MTOM Show, podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV program. I usually wear a little bit of a collar, shirt when I do these interviews. We're just talking. Sometimes our guests are in the middle of another job, and that's what our guest this week is. He's in his other job. Paul Thomas is a farmer in North Dakota that we spoke with a couple of times in 2022. If you remember his spring crop, they were just about ready to roll and it was really wet, delayed their crop. We're going to find out how things went. Spoiler alert, the rains shut off and really kind of put a damper on what could have been a great crop. Ended up pretty good, as Paul will tell us. Paul is in the middle of his other job, which is a state representative in the state of North Dakota, and this happens to be the year that they work. That's that legislature that works every other year. This is the season for him. So we got him out of committee. His work was done for the day, and we talked farming, but we also talked about what issues are in the North Dakota legislature of agricultural interest. So we get a little policy and a little catch-up and a fun story about Paul as a fantasy football player. That's this installment of the MTOM Show podcast. Oh, Paul, you're going to throw off the curve here with that tie. There's a reason for it, though. You have a button. I just have a logo. We didn't disclose this the last time. You're a legislator.
I'm a legislator. I am chairman of the House Ag Committee in our legislative body.
And that is in the state of North Dakota.
Correct. State of North Dakota.
How long have you been elected?
This is my second term second session, first term of serving in the North Dakota legislature. First time being the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee.
What's on the House Agriculture Committee in North Dakota's legislature this year?
You know, we've had a pretty full schedule so far. One of the initiatives that I've been behind driving is we are trying to do our best to try and promote animal agriculture growth in North Dakota. We've seen a rapid decline in the numbers of dairies and swine and poultry operations over the past decades. And a number of factors have certainly led to that. But one of those that I strongly feel that has hurt our industry in North Dakota is the lack of the ability of investment from corporation style business structures. And so we have a bill in this session that is looking to expand the ability for corporate investment into animal agriculture. It's limited to just 160 acres in size, and it limits it just to the animal agriculture facilities. So that's a priority of mine in this session. There's it's been a long history in North Dakota of being opposed to that sort of structure, but some of the changes that have occurred in agriculture, I think, really warrant our need to look at it as it pertains to animal agriculture. We have 2 for sure soybean crush plants being built in our state, possibly a third that's going to be built, and those crush plants are going to bring significant amounts of soybean meal into our state and have it right here. And so the ability of that feed being here is certainly one of the main reasons we need to really move on this.
So, okay, help me out. It doesn't sound like it's a confinement bill. This sounds, when you say animal agriculture, that's what regular folks jump to. They just think it's all about animals and confinement. You're talking more business and development with animals. I just want to get a little bit of that clarify. This
would be more specifically targeting towards whatever that larger operation is. Like you say, typically it's confinement. So whether it's a confined hog feeding operation, whether it's the modern dairy operations that are just what reality is of today's operations, the confined poultry operations, yes. So it'd be for those sort of facilities.
Okay. You said this in the last session and didn't make it out to a vote,
no.
Or what?
No, actually, this is it's been different approaches have been looked at over the past years to try and expand into the ability to do this. The last time that was brought up was back in 2015. So this is the first attempt again to pass something. The scope, I believe, on our attempt here is quite tight, and really, in my opinion, really targets the area where we need the corporate investment to really make these industries flourish in North Dakota.
Do you get the sense that there's strong opposition, strong support? Too early to tell?
So we have farm organizations in the state that are strongly in support of it, and there's a farm organization in the state that's strongly against it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's like anything, though, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a bill,
it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And so yeah, that's a big issue that we're working on. We're also looking at a number of other animal agriculture bills and I shouldn't just say animal agriculture, but agriculture in general. I'm trying to, make sure our zoning laws that we have are both protective of county and township ability to control their local zoning ordinances, but also keeping in mind that we can't zone individual property rights away from the individuals that are trying to make a living out there in producing crops and animal agriculture. So we're looking at that. We have a number of commodity bills that seem to surface every session, and then probably the other big issue, which is probably affecting a lot of other states, is discussion on foreign ag land ownership. That's certainly a hot topic, it seems, across the country. So looking at bills to do with that also in the Agriculture Committee.
That's funny that you say that, because that also was on my list. Once you open the door there, there's the chair of the U.S. House of Representatives Agriculture Committee, Glenn Thompson, said the day we're recording this, he's a little hesitant to go all the way on restricting foreign ownership of land. There's another few members of his caucus that are, as he calls it, or at least as it's written around, they've been watching cable news. There's those who are buying land around you, Paul. You're a farmer. Who's buying the land around you?
Well, for me specifically, the people buying the land around me are farmers, farmers and ranchers. Probably the bigger concern in reality of what's happening in our state is, and partly to me is even as concerning, if not more concerning, is we have some well-to-do individuals that have participated in some of our recreational opportunities on land, farmland, whether that's, you're camping or whatever that may be, but more likely hunting. And they get a taste of North Dakota's fall environment here and fall in love with it. They fall in love with the beauty here, and they have the wherewithal to buy a quarter or two of land, which in itself is not necessarily a terrible thing. But as we look at it from a state, when they do that, and the only use of that land from that point forward is their recreational or hunting opportunities, our local communities and our state are both losing out from the economic impact that land would be having by producing a crop or producing livestock. And that to me is really equally as concerning, that we start losing agricultural land and idling it from that perspective. In North Dakota, one of the things as it pertains to foreign land ownership that kind of drove this was the potential of the Fufeng corn wet milling plant just outside of Grand Forks that really kind of drove a lot of interest.
And that story, I think, just had a resolution or a development in the last couple of days, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, last week the federal government basically declared that there was significant concerns with that proposal to our nation's security, and so essentially stop that project from moving forward.
There is a survey being done right now, is my understanding, and it'll be released early summer. I think it's mostly Iowa related, and I don't know if it's Midwest, but it is going to look at ownership of land. Do you know of anything being done by anybody in your state that's looking at studying who is actually, I mean, and what percentage owns farmland in the state?
In testimonies that we've heard before the committee, I don't think that's really clear. And there's a FSA reporting form for foreign ag land ownership. In our state, the information we were able to gather, there was very little owned. It was more so leased by governments, foreign governments, and that particularly pointed to wind towers. A lot of that. There's certainly in our state, there's maybe a little bit more from being right next to Canada. You start seeing some of that, just back and forth that happens just by living next to the border, but vice versa. There's, certainly United States farmers that, are North Dakota farmers that own land, on the other side of the border as well. So.
Well, yeah. Foreign ownership is, I think, what a lot of folks instantly jump to is China or Brazil or something like that. But
yeah,
Canada is the foreign owner in some of the land, which is almost your backyard in some counties of your state. So that takes a whole different connotation. What about NFL football players? So that's what we just had in Iowa here a couple of months ago. Came in and bought. And the way I'm reading, I'm guessing, knowing where that land is, at least speculative, that could be a hunting situation. It's similar to what you were talking about.
Right. And, it's more difficult. I mean, we have to keep in mind, in those situations and as I alluded to, certainly you lose the economic activity, but we also have to be very mindful in this country of private property rights, and that individual has that right to sell that piece of land to that NFL football player if they so choose. And if that NFL football player chooses to keep it for hunting, we do have to be very respectful and cognizant of those private property rights.
Which is what I'm kind of reading between the lines of what Representative Thompson on the U.S. level is also pointing out, that there is a faction that says, yes, property rights, and we can't dictate who owns what. There's certain legislative bounds that we need to stay within. Speaking of football, are you a part of this traveling trophy in fantasy football that's the bipartisan effort in the North Dakota legislature? This is a hot story I just saw right while I was waiting to talk to you, Paul.
I don't know if you're trying to rub salt in the wounds or what.
Oh, you were in it.
I didn't even make the top 8 to make the playoffs. So I was participatory the last couple of years, and I failed miserably with my team to have any bit of chance at getting the trophy.
So how many are in this event?
12 of us. There's 12 of us.
Okay. Yeah. So bottom 4. Does that mean you're going to get relegated?
There will definitely be some penalty for that. Absolutely.
But you didn't finish last, did you?
Well, technically I did not finish last, but the bottom 4 finished last. So
Okay. Because, in soccer, it's always and we talk about it in American sports. What if we had relegation? So, but you don't think you're getting relegated to South Dakota or something like that?
It would never be something that bad. No.
But is it truly bipartisan? And
it truly is. It truly is. We have both Democrats and Republicans, and a couple members of the executive branch as well on the team. All things being known, the couple of members of the executive branch are former legislative branch legislators that moved to the executive branch, and we decided they were well and good enough to keep them still on.
In Iowa, there was always a long history of farmer legislators. What's the percentage in North Dakota that is that way still today?
Say that again.
How many legislators in North Dakota are still farmers?
Oh, boy, I don't even know the exact percent of that. So in the North Dakota House, we have 94 members in the House of Representatives. I would guess maybe 10 to 15% of us are, either active farmers or fairly recently retired farmers. So relatively small percentage.
Okay. Your farm. That's the whole reason we were going to talk. And thank you for indulging me on the legislative speak. And since the way this schedule worked out. How did things go? Maybe you were just too busy farming in the fall to focus on football.
Yeah, well, the fall actually harvest season went really smoothly. We at our particular farm, late July, the rain shut off, and we really never had any precip in the fall at all. So it certainly expedited the speed of harvest. Small grains and the early crops were average to above average. We went in extremely wet. With the snowstorm as we talked, and we had sufficient moisture to get the small grains there. But unfortunately for our farm, not getting any of the August rains really kind of hurt our corn and soybean. My oldest son that just returned home to farm that rented a couple hundred acres this year was fortunate and caught one extra rain and had a above average soybean crop and average corn crop. And all of our land all around the same area, that just didn't catch that one shower was average to below average. So it was right on the cusp. Our crop was of, being really quite good with the price and the way everything turned out. I mean, it was certainly a very good year for our region, but certainly could have used a couple more rains.
Which is, I won't say fun to say, ironic, given the way the spring was for you.
Yeah. It absolutely was. We came into that spring being worried about, a terrible drought. And then we got that tremendous snowfall of 4 feet of snow there. And that without that, we would have probably had a disaster. So, that was the blessing in disguise. And, even from the ranching community, so many of the cow calf producers that lost calves at the end, were thankful that that storm actually happened, because we had tremendous hay production. Grasses were plentiful for the pastures, but coming into the fall, we got dry. We did get some really late fall moisture, and then we've had probably average to a little above average snowfall. So going into next spring in our region, we're going to be hoping for some good spring rains, but we're probably in a little better condition than we were last year.
Do you have confidence in one crop over another ahead in 23 as you sit here in early February?
So on our farm, we're probably going to increase our corn acres a little bit. We're going to be a little less. We're a little high on soybean acres than what we normally would be. We'll have maybe a more normal soybean acreage mix. Our small grains will probably equally split between wheat, barley, and oats. And then we'll have yellow pea production again. And some of those soybean acres are probably going to be replaced with pinto bean production, which we didn't do last year, which we typically do some acres of pinto beans.
Is that a rotation thing, or is that a marketing thing?
It's a marketing thing mainly. Pinto beans, typically we can usually capture more income, but they're in our region, they're a little more risky. Just growing them, and certainly a little more management to growing pinto beans and soybeans.
And I'm on your wheat. I forget. Do you do a little bit of winter, but mostly spring wheat?
We have done winter in the past, but it's been quite a long time. Our wheat is almost all spring wheat.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. Around you though, or in the state, do you know of many with winter, and do they feel good about the way it's sitting under snow and enough moisture?
We have very few winter wheat acres in North Dakota.
Yeah.
I think it's a few hundred thousand every year, but it's not very significant crop. Statewide, there's a significant snow cover. So I think anybody that would have fall crop seeded would be in very good shape.
And when you say significant snow cover in the state of North Dakota, what does that mean? That to me, that means a foot of snow on the ground. To you, is that 4 feet?
No, it wouldn't be quite 4 feet, but so Bismarck is state capital where we're at, and they have received by December they had received more than their average yearly snowfall. Already in December. January has been quite arid. There hasn't been much snowfall in North Dakota in January, but I would say most of the state is close to their normal yearly total. So any moisture we get in March and April typically is the wetter snow, the snow that, makes more of an impact. So Yeah, I mean, land cover, yeah, maybe there's a foot out there to 2 feet, across the landscape.
Well, yeah, we had that. In fact, we just had the discussion on the show a couple of weeks ago. Snow doesn't break drought. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't necessarily help you as much. So as you look at weather and look towards spring, you mentioned catching a rain, catching a snow. Are you sitting up? I look at drought monitors. North Dakota is still one of those states, maybe to the west of you, still a little bit of an issue, dry conditions. Is that right?
Certainly, and quite honestly, that's what we get used to living with. It's kind of a saying that if you want the weather to change in North Dakota, just wait till tomorrow, and you're only 1 week away from a drought. Our climate and our water holding capacity of our land is probably a little less than what a lot of your viewers are accustomed to, and certainly what the eastern part of our state is. So we every year we rely on those timely rains from April through August.
What about your livestock friends? How are they handling things right now? We just had a big report last week about cattle and just not much inventory out there. But are people expanding up there?
Yeah, I think the cattle industry in North Dakota, which is predominantly cow-calf industry, is fairly optimistic. We had 2 years ago, we had that terrible drought, and there was a lot of animals sold and herds decreased in size. Last year, we saw sufficient grass production and good hay production, where people, I think, kept a lot of heifers back and to try and rebuild their herds. I don't think they necessarily were real aggressive buying new animals, but just retaining some of those. And so I would say, the beef industry in our state is really, cautiously optimistic about what next year holds.
So, optimistic, you'll take that, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there's some years where
yeah.
you're pessimistic.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's now put your legislative hat back on with what you just said about a status report of agriculture in the state. What type of assistance, you mentioned one program already, but are there things legislators need to look at to assist the farmer of North Dakota?
So we're focusing on a few things. One is infrastructure. Our state's bridge infrastructure is significantly eroded, and that county and township bridge infrastructure all falls on the backs of local property taxpayers. Our state has done very well in the past biennium with the volume of oil that we've pumped out, and the price being significantly higher than projected, has increased our budget revenues, or our general fund revenues, and our opportunity to participate, hopefully back with the local subs in taking care of some of those long-term legacy type projects. I think would be it's certainly a priority of mine that I hope to see our legislature fund to help out there. We have an infrastructure fund that we are looking to put some money into that would assist local political subdivisions, whether it's a county or township or city, when value-added egg projects or animal egg projects are located in there, so that if a road needs to be rebuilt, or water or natural gas lines or three-phase power need to be moved there, that the state is saying, hey, we know that these will make significant differences in our state's economy, and we're willing to participate with the local economy or the local subdivisions and helping build that infrastructure there that's necessary for these value-added projects or for these animal egg projects. So those would be a couple of the highlights I think that we're really looking to do. There's some other proposals out there, whether they come to fruition or not, is some assistance for a fertilizer plant that would manufacture most likely anhydrous ammonia. With our state's overabundance of flaring that's happening with the natural gas and the oil wells, trying to find beneficial uses that we can do with that we can still keep our oil fields producing the same amount of oil. And from a rural perspective, in the last November special election that we had, a body had appropriated $150 million to try and construct a natural gas pipeline across the northern tier of North Dakota that never came to fruition. And so the body is looking at ways to partner with private industry to see how we can try and move that project forward. Because as we see the rural communities across the northern part of our state, without the access to the larger quantities of natural gas, has certainly inhibited their ability to attract manufacturing and some of those industries that are really necessary for communities to grow.
And dealing with what landowners want on their land by means that they want, and not have a government come in and take, if have to. Eminent domain's always a discussion. Iowa's, on a carbon pipeline discussion, and I know that would go over parts of either Minnesota or South Dakota on its way to you. I'm sure you're very aware of some of those projects that come along from other states that might end up in your area at some point.
Yeah, there's significant discussions in the legislative body this session concerning the carbon sequestration pipeline. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The topics are never ending for
No,
for a
they're
lawmaker to deal with. If you had to put 2022's crop on the Thomas farm into a category, which category would you put it as a whole?
Yield wise, I would say average to slightly above average. From a overall economic profitability, one of the best.
Still have corn to sell?
I do.
Good.
I do still have corn to sell. Yes.
All right. You did store, but not ignore?
I think I've done pretty well so far. I've had timely sales. The market really hasn't made significant moves since harvest. So we've been selling gradually into it. I don't have a significant amount of corn left. The beans are all moved. We do have a little bit of spring wheat to market as well, but we're getting down there. And we've started a new crop. We started that last fall already. Okay. Started selling some of the new crop. So,
anything into 24 yet?
Haven't done anything 24 yet. No.
We haven't had a question like that in a couple of months, so I'm guessing that little momentum has stopped. So,
yeah.
So more time to market your grain and less time to look at the waiver wire to put onto your fantasy football team. Got it. Okay. I appreciate it, Paul. Thank you so much for the time. Enjoy the legislative session and the crop year to come here in 2023.
Yeah, great visiting with you. Great catching up again, and thank you.
My thanks to Paul Thomas. Best to him in 2023 in the farm there in North Dakota. If you have any feedback for this podcast, send it at markettomarket@iowapbs.org. New episodes come out each and every Tuesday. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching or listening, or for those that read, see you later.